Hello everyone and welcome to episode 25 of the Daily Critique, where I'm going to be discussing 6 images by Alex de Kock. I believe they're all of South Africa. Again, this is going to be a fairly general critique, but we are going to focus on one specific aspect, which is getting it right when the conditions are really fantastic and still remembering to focus on composition. So let's get started. So here are the 6 images that Alex sent in. Perhaps he sent 6 because he knew I was going to make short work of this first image. He did tell me not to hold back along with his email. So we'll discuss that one first and we'll go through them in Photoshop as normal. So Alex, I'm not a huge fan of this image, and the reason I'm not is largely because your focal point, this dead tree here, is a dead tree, which is not really very interesting. I mean, they seem to be a favorite subject of photographers, these long dead trees, but to me they just look like a sign of destruction and the natural world being wiped out. There's nothing intrinsically interesting about this particular dead tree, in my opinion. Maybe if it had some branches or something more to create a more dynamic shape. And it just feels very stark against the rest of the landscape and too dominant, actually. I think maybe there's some potential here for a shot with the right circumstances. Certainly the conditions and timing are quite nice to shoot a shot like this. But I think were I to approach this myself and were I to fall in love with this tree, what I'd probably try and do is walk a bit further back and shoot with a longer lens to bring the mountain range forward, and particularly to connect this foreground tree to the background trees, because these are really lost at the moment. They're so small within the image. If you take a step back and zoom in, you'd effectively bring the scale of the 2 sets of trees closer together, so then you might get a stronger link there. But of course, if you did that, you'd start to lose the moon. And although the moon would be bigger, it would also be probably out of frame by that point. So you'd have to come at a point when the moon was closer to the horizon, which maybe it would have been at a slightly different time. But yeah, I mean, the subject matter isn't really for me, and it just doesn't appeal from a content standpoint. And compositionally, I just think that this tree is a bit too strong, even looking at it from a purely graphic side. Okay, and then on to this image of Cockle Bay. I have to say, the first thing that I noticed when I saw this was like a glow to the ridge there opposite, and I think that's the autumn effect that I'm seeing, and that really isn't to my taste. Generally, I mean, occasionally it works with woodland images, but I've often had discussions with my friend Huchard Malan about this, because he used to apply these techniques himself. But yeah, that's not for me, and it does leap out at me. But as for the shot in general, I think it's very beautiful. I love the limited amount of light striking the ridges here, and where there isn't direct light, there's nice sculpting light. So the light here is soft, but it brings out the crags very nicely, and this golden light is absolutely stunning. You've got the waves rushing in, and a nice shutter speed, actually. This doesn't look too busy to me. There's plenty of texture there, but it's not overwhelming. I'm not sure about the balance between the white water and the sand. Perhaps there's a bit too much sand, and the bottom of the frame might be happier somewhere there, just to reduce that amount. And another thing that I notice is the sort of electric blue of the sky here. That really is too strong. Some colors can cope with a lot of movement. You can shift yellows to orange, you can saturate oranges and reds, and it can all look really wonderful, but blue skies are very unforgiving to those kinds of edits, because we know what a blue sky looks like, and unfortunately a blue sky never looks quite like that. It's a sort of cyan, rich cyan electric blue, so that does need to be toned down a little bit, and I think I've had a quick go here. Yeah, let's have a peek. So I'll just compare the two here. So I mean, I've not introduced as quite as much saturation. There's a bit more magenta in this image on the left, which is maybe nice. But the blue sky should be a bit more muted like this, or it starts to detract. And you could also consider starting to crop some of that blue sky out, because I think if you bring the top edge of the frame down to somewhere like there, it gives the sense that the clouds are more continuous. So that's maybe preferable, and complements cropping up from the bottom as well. And incidentally, I don't mind this 50-50 split, sky to sand and sea in this particular case. I think that's absolutely fine. Okay, so on to the meat of this video. We've got two images here taken from, I believe this area is Blueberg Beach, if that's how it's said, or Bloberg, or I'm not exactly sure, but it's a stretch of coastline with a massive sandy beach and then some limited rock outcrops at the end of it, looking towards Table Mountain in Cape Town. So Cape Town is the city at the bottom here. Cape Town is a port, so you regularly see ships. You can see a couple coming in here, and more unfortunately in the other shot, two rather gigantic ships that are much closer, which are rather unfortunate. I'm not sure whether I would clone those out or not, because they're such a permanent feature of these views of Cape Town. It feels right that some should be in there, but the thing that these two shots share in common, aside from the fact that they're taken in the same area and of broadly the same subject, is that they're both taken in absolutely spectacular light and have an almost sensational feel to them. I mean, there's this long exposure here creating a magical water texture to complement the incredible colours in the sky, and I quite like this motion in the clouds sort of zipping through. It creates a very speedy feel, I guess, and really engaging image. And similarly here, I mean, what a sky that is! Absolutely incredible. I don't know if a thunderstorm has just passed through, but clearly you've got the sun shining up into these clouds here, and then a much darker, deeper blue away from the sun, and you've got that cloud rolling over Table Mountain. I mean, absolutely spectacular conditions. Beautiful colour in the water too. It is a little bit enhanced, but certainly not unnatural. I had a look at the raw file, so I think that's perfectly reasonable, and nice wave motion too. So much to love about both of these images, but I sort of feel like Alex might have been taken away here by the epic light problem, which is you see the most amazing light and you get so excited that you forget about composition, which may seem a bit harsh, but I think we all do it, so hopefully everybody can relate to that problem, and sometimes you can get away with it, and the best way to get away with it is to simplify as much as possible if you're rushing, and then it's less of an issue. You don't need to find those spellbinding compositions, because the light does do a lot of work for you in these circumstances. But here we've just got this enormous swathe of rock on the right hand side of the image that really throws it out of balance, and I can understand photographing in this direction, because you've got the light bleed coming in from the left, so you certainly don't want to sort of end the frame here and just photograph this section, because you lose that absolutely stunning transition of light. But surely if you were to just walk over here and take the photo, you'd find some waves breaking over a slightly more linear shoreline and not have this unbalanced feel to the composition. And maybe that's because you were aiming to capture this kind of wave motion here, but I think that's a relatively small feature compared to the imbalance created by that rock there on the right, unfortunately. And we see a similar problem in this image. Just a huge mass of rock on the left throws the shot out of balance, to the point that you could almost consider, just cropping a whole ton of it out to stop that from happening, because it just drags me in, this rock on the left. And this foreground with the moss-covered rock is very interesting here, as is all of this drifting out into the horizon. But if there were any way to find a way of pulling that into the shot, but without this massive rock here, then I would look to do that. And just looking at this shot and guessing at what might be possible. I mean, if you just walk over here, could you not position these rocks, say, somewhere over here? And maybe just pan around slightly more, put the edge of the frame there. I don't know. It looks like you might be able to reconstruct this composition, but without the the seaweed covered rock there. Because I assume what you can't do is move to the right here, because you're probably going to end up in the sea. So yeah, amazing conditions, really nicely shot from a technical standpoint and nicely edited, but I think the composition there unfortunately is a little bit lacking. But like I said, everybody does that because you get excited with these amazing colors, and yeah, you slightly forget that composition is incredibly important. Right, so this is one of the images that really jumped out at me on social media. I think one of my friends shared it last year, one of my South African friends, and what a spectacular shot this is. Really magical, interpretive almost, wild. It almost looks like a painting, and yet I imagine this is a relatively cultivated or protected landscape. You can see there's it looks like a mausoleum down there, so maybe that's what it is. So it's certainly near to civilization, but very, very wild feeling. And this is the kind of image that I'm sure would work absolutely brilliantly as a print, because it's got that air of mystery about it, which is always great from a standalone image, to create that curiosity in the viewer, and this is very successful in that respect. I would say that the mausoleum is the only, let's call it a mausoleum, is the only thing really that spoils the image. Potentially these trees here too, actually, on the right, because they're so linear that they almost look like a structure themselves, and maybe those could be slightly toned down just to push them into the background a little bit more. But the mausoleum here really is quite the distraction, in particular because it's in this rather large area of dark, toned, I guess thinner mist. So I would certainly consider here bringing the right edge of the frame in just until you lose the verticals of the mausoleum, because having that little corner coming in is not so much of a problem, and that does leave enough space on the left. Now you do lose some of the sense of expansiveness, so that crop isn't without any drawbacks, but I would probably go with that compromise myself, just because I think if I were to have this on the wall, the mausoleum would annoy me forevermore. So that's how I would approach the edit myself. But otherwise, I mean, wow, what an amazing image that is. Okay, finally onto this really excellent image of the cultured landscape. I guess this is in the Cape region. And I'm actually really enjoying images like this by a photographer called Richard Fox, who used to live down in Devon, where I grew up, and he photographed the fields in the area that I grew up far better than anybody had before him that I know of anyway, and so I've developed a real enthusiasm for this kind of shot, and I think that this is a really successful version of that style of image, and it really captures what the South African cultured landscape looks like to me when I've been to the Drakensberg and the Cape region. I think it's a really, really good representation of it, with that spectacular light to really show it off to its best. So I think there's a lot going for this image, and I wish more photographers pursued this style of imagery, because it's very easy to make beautiful images of the mountains in some ways. I mean, obviously it can be physically challenging, and you still have to be employ your creative abilities, but I think these images are much under photographed. These scenes are much under photographed. So well done for even shooting this, Alex. I have had a bit of a play with the edit of this myself. I think there are areas where it's perhaps been slightly overworked, particularly the highlights in the top of the image here, around where the light's shining through. I'd keep those a lot brighter and just tickle the whites effectively with detail, rather than having this sort of mid-grey immediately next to white. It looks a bit too contrasty, and this little pool in here certainly seems too dark, and almost like clarity's been applied or something like that. I'm not sure about the richness of the green in the foreground. It's relatively colourless, and this green in the foreground's not really helping anything. If anything, it draws your attention into an area that isn't interesting at all. The road here on the right is annoying, and maybe you could have just ran 20 meters and solved that problem. That would obviously have moved these trees over to the right, but looking at the scene, I think that would have been fine. So yeah, maybe that could have been removed, but you could have been rushing too. I'm not exactly sure of the circumstances of the shot, but I have had a quick go at re-editing it myself. So I will just show you what I've done here. So let's compare these two. There we go. So I've got a lot less color in my image, maybe a little bit too little even. Let's go across here and you can see some of my edits. Yeah, so I haven't actually directly taken any saturation out, but one thing I have done is lost some of that foreground because it was just a bit flat and it wasn't achieving anything, and I liked the big sky versus small landscape idea, so increasing that imbalance to me is desirable. I toned down the road a little bit just to make it less of a distraction, and I actually set a more of a white point in the foreground there just to create that sense of silvery light. So you can just see I've pushed the whites here, so this is the change that makes in that area. And I've also added a bit of contrast and even a bit of clarity to this central sun rays portion of the image. Clarity I almost never use, and you really shouldn't use it unless you're very, very careful. That's a general tip for everybody, because I've seen plenty of images trashed with the clarity slider. But yeah, that's the comparison again. So you can see Alex's image is more colourful, but I think that enhancing the brightness and the silvery light and having the brighter highlights in the clouds, I do think that's preferable myself, and keeping some darker tones in the foreground as well to make the most of that contrast, because that's going to enhance the sense of brightness in other areas of the image. So thanks very much, Alex, for sending those in. More interesting discussions there, and great to see more shots of South Africa. So thank you very much.